That's the theory of mind. And there's a naive sociology, which is the child's developing sense of how social relations work and how society is organized and all of that kind of stuff. Most work from the point of view of the theory of cognitive development is focused on the theory of mind, intuitive physics, naive physics, and naive biology. I don't think there's that much yet, is there, on naive sociology? There's a little bit, but not much. There ought to be. There's a sociology major out there. Go do that. That would be a very good thing to do. Okay, so from the point of view of cognitive development, let's return to specifically to the theory of mind. The idea here is that other people have beliefs. Okay, these beliefs may be true or false, and these beliefs that other people have may differ from our own. You can see the connection to Piaget's the idea of egocentrism. But it's not just beliefs. The theory of mind also entails the idea that other people have feelings and desires and all sorts of things that may differ from our own, and that this ability to comprehend that other people may have knowledge and beliefs and thoughts and feelings and desires that are different from our own is really, if you think about it for a second, no less than the development of social cognition. So that's the idea. So how do we know? How do we do that? Well, a very famous task that's used to measure the child's acquisition of a theory of mind, and especially the child's understanding that other people may have thoughts and beliefs and feelings and desires that are different from his or her own, is represented by what's known as the false belief task. Most of you have had some contact with this. If you haven't, you'll like this. If you have, you can sleep for 5 minutes. Here we have this classic illustration of the false belief task. There's an experimenter, okay, and there's a real child, and there's a puppet involved in this. And what happens is that the experimenter will show the child the puppet, and there's a ball, and the puppet hides. You can do this with little kids. It's hard to do this with college sophomores, but you get your puppet, you have your puppet hide a ball in an oatmeal container, and then the puppet goes away. It's put in a closet, or it's put outside the room, or whatever. After it's done that, and then what happens is that the experimenter and the child will move the puppet, will move the ball from the oatmeal container into a box. Then the experimenter will go and get the puppet, open up the cabinet, or go outside and bring the puppet in, and then we'll ask the child, where will the puppet look for the ball? Okay. Now remember, the puppet hid the ball in the oatmeal container, but after the puppet left the scene, the experimenter and the child worked together to move the puppet from the oatmeal container to the box. And what happens is that 3-year-olds and some 4-year-olds will say, will tell the experimenter that the puppet will look for the ball in the box. And when you ask them why, they'll say, because that's where it is. They'll give you one of these 3-year-old answers, right? But if you ask 5-year-olds and some 4-year-olds where the puppet will look for the ball, they will say, the puppet will look in the oatmeal container. And when you say why, they'll say something, some variant on, because that's where the puppet thinks it is. Okay? Here we have children who think that other people, including other puppets, have mental states like theirs. Here we have a child who understands that other people, including the puppet, will have mental states like he or she does. And as I say, this kind of thing tends to develop. There's an interesting precursor of the false belief task in the Hebrew Bible, for those of you who know your Hebrew Bible, in the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were sons of Isaac by Rebekah, and they were twins, except Jacob, Esau was a little bit older than Jacob, and so his birthright, Esau was going to get the birthright from Isaac instead of Jacob because he was older. And it turns out that, for those of you who don't know the story, Esau was born very hairy, and Jacob was born with very smooth skin. But Rebekah had gotten this prophecy that the older would obey the younger, and that it was Jacob actually who was going to be the big honcho, and not Esau. So at some point, Isaac became very old. 123 years old, I think, something like that. And he was blind, and he figured he was going to die soon, so he decided to give his older son his blessing. So he sent Esau out hunting to get some meat for a big meal. And while Esau was away from the house, Rebekah, who was still around as well, went to Jacob and said, "Okay, it's time for you to go and get your father's blessing." And Jacob says, "But he'll know it's not me." Right? And she said, "Well, no, he won't, because I've got these goat skins here, and we're gonna put these goat skins on your head and on your arms, and Isaac can't see anything, so he'll think that you're Esau and give you his blessing." And then in fact that's what happened. But here, what we've got is Rebekah knowing what Isaac will think, okay? So really, and in fact, doing something very much like the false belief task that Isaac will have, because he doesn't know the switch happened. Isaac will believe that he's giving his blessing to Esau instead of Jacob. These are the Gioberti Gates of Paradise on the Florence Baptistry, which tells the whole story. Very, very interesting story, and wonderful doors, by the way, which you can see replicas of at Grace Cathedral on Nob Hill in San Francisco. If you want to see it, it's real nice. Okay, anyway, back to the false belief task. Here we see research by Henry Wellman and his associates testing children who are 30 months of age. Okay, that's less than 3 years of age, 90 months of age on the false belief task, and you can see this really nice developmental progression, so that when children become 5 years old or so, the majority of them are passing the false belief test. They seem to have acquired the understanding that their mental states may be different from the mental states of other people. Here's just a different portrayal of the same thing. I'll skip over that in the interest of time. Now you can push this around a little bit. You can enhance the performance of younger children on this task if you do various kinds of things. So for example, if you say to the 3-year-old, "Let's fool the puppet," right? Now that he's gone, let's play a big joke on him and move the ball from the oatmeal container to the box. Well, then younger children will begin to answer the question correctly. If the kid participates in the transformation, the moving of the ball from the oatmeal container to the box, again, you can back up the age. There are lots of other things you can do to push this around. But the general finding, and the finding that really we care about here, has to do with the basic false belief task. Where will the puppet look? 3-year-olds say the puppet will look where I know it is. 5-year-olds will say the puppet will look where he or she thinks it is. Okay. If you want to think about the developmental endpoint for social cognition, this is part of the developmental endpoint, and it's what Adolf Schultz and others have called intersubjectivity. Subjectivity, what we call consciousness, has to do with our awareness of our own mental states or our own behavioral dispositions. My awareness that I'm outgoing, that I'm happy, or that I want to be alone, or whatever it is that I want. These are things that conscious beings, like human beings, can say about themselves. But intersubjectivity, which is what we're talking about here, social cognition, has to do with other people's beliefs about other people's beliefs, the sharing of states of mind between people. So I perceive that somebody else tends to be an outgoing individual, or I perceive that he or she is happy, or I perceive or understand that he or she wants to be alone. So the false belief task, like egocentricity, really marks the onset of intersubjectivity, which is what social cognition is all about. Social cognition has to do with our understanding of other people's mental states, other people's thoughts and feelings and desires. In much the same way that you can push performance on the false belief task around a little bit by doing various kinds of procedural manipulations, you can also understand pretty quickly that social cognition does not simply stop here. Social cognition does not stop with the idea that one person has some appreciation of the mental states of another person. Intersubjectivity can go on a long way. Now, to understand this, to understand the rest of what we're going to do in these lectures, I got to stop for a second and make a little footnote. Okay, intersubjectivity and subjectivity are usually are often thought of in cognitive science, especially in terms of intentionality. And I just got to stop and just explain to you, for those of you who don't know, that in English, there are two quite different senses of intentionality that it's important to keep straight. Our ordinary language meaning of intentionality has to do with the motivation or the goal-directedness of behavior. This is an idea that comes from the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham and later Jem Anscombe, who was a philosophy professor at Oxford. When we say, what's your intention, what we usually mean by that question is, what are you trying to do? What's your goal? What do you want? But philosophers and many cognitive scientists use intention in an entirely different way in what you might call the epistemic sense of intentionality, which has to do with the aboutness of mental states. Or put another way, that mental states are always about something. I perceive that it's raining outside, or I perceive that the air conditioning is on, or whatever. I've got this mental state, and I understand that my mental state is about something in the world. My internal mental state relates to something in the external world. This is an idea that has its recent origins in the work of Franz Brentano. And intersubjectivity really has to do. Subjectivity has to do with intentionality. Okay, I perceive that something is the case. Intersubjectivity has to do with what you might call second-order intentionality, because what you're doing is you have a belief about somebody else's belief about something. And just to make this kind of fun, it's very clear that intersubjectivity can be kind of piled onto each other. There's a kind of recursiveness here that's quite interesting. So we can have first-order intentionality, which is simply saying, like, I feel happy. Okay, so I'm okay. And then there's second-order intentionality. Lucy knows that I feel happy. There's third-order intentionality, which is Judy believes, 1, that Lucy, 2, knows that I, 3, feel happy. Fourth-order intentionality, Stan, 1, forgot that. Judy, 2, believed that. Lucy, 3, knew that. 4, I feel happy. And you can just kind of pile these things all the way through. And again, so second-order intentionality is something that seems to develop somewhere between age 3 and 4, but it's very clear that that's not the total be-all and end-all of social cognition, because, in fact, we have at least third-order and fourth-order intentionality as well. Here's a nice example from the Odyssey. In Book 9 of the Odyssey, Odysseus has an encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Those of you who read the Odyssey or seen the movie know about this. And the Cyclops traps Odysseus and his men in his cave and won't let them out and starts eating them, which is a very bad thing. And so what happens at one point is that Odysseus mixes undiluted wine for Polyphemus and gets Polyphemus drunk, and he falls asleep, at which point Odysseus has his men blind Polyphemus. They stick a big stick in his eye. Remember, he's only got one eye. That's why he's a Cyclops. So he can't see anymore. That's what's happening in this amphora. And then later on, after Polyphemus has been blinded, did I tell you? Polyphemus is a shepherd. He's got a sheep in the cave as well. He lets the sheep out in the morning, and in order to make sure that Odysseus' men don't escape, Odysseus has his men hide themselves underneath the belly of the sheep. Polyphemus strokes the backs of the sheep to make sure that Odysseus' men aren't riding on them. But Odysseus is a trickster. He's a man of twists and turns. The whole plot of the Odyssey has to do with Odysseus' appreciation of what other people are thinking, what other people can think. Odysseus has his men do this because he knows that Polyphemus can't see. Okay, and that's a way of tricking people. So you got kind of like third-order intentionality here, with at least second-order intentionality with Odysseus knowing what Polyphemus can and can't do mentally. In Shakespeare's Othello, there's another really nice example of this. The whole plot involves Iago, who tries to make Othello believe that Desdemona has been unfaithful. So you've got Iago trying to manipulate Othello's beliefs about Desdemona. So you've got at least 3 orders of intentionality there. But it's even better than that. This is an example I owe to Robin Dunbar. When Shakespeare wrote Othello, it was Shakespeare's intention that the audience believe that Iago wanted Othello to believe that Desdemona wanted somebody else. You've got 5 levels of intentionality here. And then just one more, just to kind of fix this. The work of Jane Austen, and Jane Austen's a cool writer, but it turns out, if literary scholars are to be believed, Austen was the first author, at least in English, to work in higher order intentionality and higher order intersubjectivity into her works. Here's a really nice example from Persuasion. This is Anne Elliot, and this is Wentworth. And there's an episode in Persuasion where Anne and her sister Elizabeth go to a bakery, and they encounter Wentworth. Wentworth had asked Anne to marry him, and she had been persuaded not to accept his offer. He comes back 8 years later. They run into each other in this bakery. Elizabeth, who's very high and mighty, very snobbish, tries to ignore Wentworth, and is standing back watching this whole thing, it's very clear that Anne is watching Elizabeth ignore Wentworth, and Wentworth knowing that Elizabeth is ignoring him, and Anne understanding that Wentworth knows that Elizabeth is aware of his presence, and so on. The whole thing just this cascade of really interesting intentionality. And Austen was apparently about the first person in English to do this. This is an invention of hers in the development of the novel. Okay, here's another good example. This is a New Yorker cartoon from 1996 from Bruce Kaplan. Of course, I care about how you imagined I thought you perceived I wanted you to feel. Okay, so you can have higher order intersubjectivity even if you've only got two people in the room. You don't have to have Anne and Elizabeth and Wentworth. This is much more complicated kind of social cognition than where's the puppet going to look for the ball in the oatmeal container or the box. And it turns out that this is also something that develops. You can have all sorts of higher order intentionality here as manifested in people's abilities to read various kinds of stories. Here's work by Dunbar and his associates. So you got little stories. Jane believes that Peter supposes that Sarah thinks that Simon believes that Sarah would like to go out with Peter. Okay, so you've got 5 different levels of intentionality, and the question is, can people process this, right? Well, it turns out they can. Okay, here we have levels of intentionality, stories with up to 6 levels of intentionality. Here's percentage incorrect. People do fine if there's just 1 order of intentionality, what Peter wants. They do fine if there's 2 orders, what Stan thinks Peter wants. They do okay with 3 or 4 orders of intentionality, 5 orders of intentionality. And we start making a lot of mistakes. This is not just a memory problem, because it turns out that people can hold at least 6 different elements in their heads. But in terms of intersubjectivity, our limit seems to be about 5. Okay, so again, if we want to think about the cognitive endpoint for social cognitive development, what it is intersubjectivity, our ability to understand what's going on in the minds of some other person. That intersubjectivity is typically measured in social cognition studies by something like the false belief task, where we have one person understanding what some other person thinks, feels, wants, desires, whatever. But I want to make it clear that intersubjectivity doesn't stop at the first level. It goes all the way down, at least for a while, so that the endpoint of cognitive development doesn't stop here. It stops someplace else. And I'll show you that at the beginning of next time. Thank you very much. Stay dry. We'll see you on Wednesday.